Now that you've experienced, IT Nation, and now that you've given your talk, and I mean, I was at your Cisco event, and it was amazing, but the energy that was here and the response that you got was just off the charts. So I know whenever I get off stage, I go, if I had to summarize what I really felt or what I really thought I got across, I would kind of summarize it like this. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about what you just did and what you think, okay, if I had to give them the executive summary of what I really think would make sense from this crowd, what would it be?
Well, I think the thing is, the people in this audience seem very much interested in helping their clients do things.
Right.
And it wasn't about technology for technology's sake. It's about how do we implement this to make a difference. And so they were so open and wanted to hear this. They weren't like, oh, I don't think this is true. They were like, what do we need to do to make this work? Because they know that the differentiator is the people.
Right.
And that was just so evident. I felt like the audience, and we were talking about this is an audience that's passionate about what they do and that cares about their clients and understands that teamwork is not just a word or a fad, it's a competitive advantage. Not just for the clients, but also just for the people who work there and the people you interact with. So it's a wonderful thing to be here and to talk to people who get it.
Yeah. Well, technology teams are different from some. You usually have a lot of smart people in there. I would say probably the weakness in our industry for ConnectWise partners is the humble side. With the knowledge of technology, usually the humility level goes down a little bit. And certainly and with the focus on technology, the need to be smart about people is also something that is often, put down as far as on the weighted average of who you're going to hire. So what kind of advice would you have for people in the technology space that fit that kind of profile for hiring? What would you do?
That fit the kind of profile of?
Yeah, like they're going to be hungry. They're going to be real hungry.
Oh.
They're going to be probably probably below average. I'm just going to say probably below average on people smart, and then probably at maybe a 6 or 7 on humble, because they're kind of really into their technology and they know the technology and they like to argue about the technology as opposed to working with the person and trying to come up with an answer on the technology.
Right. You know what's interesting, because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the Silicon Valley is not a humble place.
No.
Okay, humility doesn't reign there. But the beauty of what you guys are doing is 99% of technology in the world is deployed in places other than the Silicon Valley. And yet there's this culture of technology that kind of pervades, that comes out of there. But you're serving people that are actually getting things done in the real world. And so there's no reason to allow for that culture of lack of humility, because your clients don't want that. And so what I would say is this: technology compared to where it was 20 years ago is simpler. It's more complex in terms of all the different things we can do in applications, but to be a user of technology and to teach people how to use technology, it actually helps if you can empathize with them more. And I know you said empathy is one of your values.
Right.
So I would say hire people who certainly, there's a whole bunch of people in the world who love technology, but there's plenty of them who don't carry any of the baggage with them of this makes me better than other people or this makes me smarter. In fact, it's the ones who actually are humble enough to really empathize with people who don't get it that are going to do the best. And I'm one of those people that doesn't get it.
Right.
I mean, I used to work in technology firms. We use technology well, but it just doesn't come naturally to me. It's a huge blind spot. And when I meet a person who loves to implement technology and teach it to people like me, they're so valuable. Far beyond the technical thing that they do, but they're teachers and they're helpers and they're consultants first. And that's what I would say. Find people that like to help and implement and get things done, and then make sure they understand and like technology. As opposed to, in other words, if you have an ocean of people you're looking for, don't just go to the technology pool. Start with a pool of like who helps and likes to get things done. Now in that one, let's find the people that are good at technology. And it's a longer cycle to finding good people, but it's a much more fruitful one, I think. So fish in the pool of helpers, not the fish in the pool of technology people alone.
Great. I'm going to open it up for questions here. Now what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to just repeat the question on camera, but who would like to have a question answered? It just has to be a little bit generic. It can't be 100% specific to you. But
right. Do you think the three traits are more adaptable at certain times? Because I seem to use them in different facets with different people and audiences. Which one I need to?
When you say adaptable, what do you mean?
So sometimes I have to be a little bit more smart in a situation versus humble. I have to put that as a priority. And other times I have to, use another one as my priority. Is what I'm saying. Versus over time, where you say they're consistent over time, I use them more in situations.
So how would we, let's summarize the question.
I think I could do it. Do you want me to try to do it?
Well, then repeat what you
Yeah.
think the question
Yeah.
is and then answer it.
Yeah. So when someone asks me if different values are more important at different times than others, if there are times, I would say yes, but a person has to have the capacity for all of them at once. But certainly there's going to be a situation that calls for even more interpersonal intelligence, smarts than others. And certain times it's going to be all about humility. You're dealing with a client, for instance, and something's gone wrong, and you just have to own that problem. Humility is really high at that point.
Yeah.
You've got a heroic thing to do, and you're going to have to be up all night installing something for a client and helping them solve a big mission-critical problem. Okay, hunger is going through the roof at that point. So yes, I think different values peak in terms of their requirements, but a person has to have the capacity for all of them and then draw on the one they need the most at that time. What I would not want to do is say certain jobs a person just has to be hungry. Certain jobs a person just has to be humble. It really is the combination in a human being that makes for a team player. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good. Yes?
So I was curious, three soft skills, things that you're really focused on. You've outlined in other books, other soft skills and things that folks need. We talked about hard skills and not hiring just based on hard skills, needing to understand these soft skills. How do you manage that across a large organization? How do you think in terms, Arnie's thinking, okay, we're going to be humble, hungry, smart, but there's other things they need to think about. How do you start with your leadership team, you think about teams, how do you get that down to your managers? How do you think about where that cascades throughout your entire workforce?
So the question is, so you have a complex organization, how do you get it throughout? It has to start at the top. I work with two amazing companies. I work with many amazing companies, but two that everybody knows about, Southwest Airlines and Chick-fil-A. And I've been with their executive teams of both. And here's the thing about them that sets them apart. It's modeled, modeled sounds like they're doing it is lived and embodied at the top more than anywhere else. So the people that are at the top, so it's really about, at ConnectWise, it's Arnie and his team have to be the absolute role models of this in order for it, and then they have to be absolutely intolerant of people who don't share that. I don't mean in a moment or in a brief period of time. And if the leaders of a company really believe in something, they can get it spread throughout if they're modeling it all the time themselves and are intolerant when they see it violated, calling it out. So there's no easy systems or switches to flip, but that's where it starts. And too often people go, what's a good program for doing this? And what I would say is this, I would over any program or any system or any communication style, I would say live it at the top, and whenever you see violations, call it out, and that will be more effective than any videos or conversations or surveys or any other systems like that. The other thing I would say is keep it simple. I think one of the reasons why Humble, Hungry, Smart is helpful because it's like you can get your hands around that. When we have 12 different values and they're kind of used here and some of them are skills and some of them are those, it's hard for people to act on any of them. So simplicity, lived at the top, constantly reminded. That's what I would say. What do you think?
I think that's great. I think the book is, if you ask me the question of how do you make this concept work inside of your company, the answer is simple. You read it first, you give it to your executive management team, and then you make it part of your company like we have at ConnectWise. It is our basis for onboarding. It is our basis for interviewing. It's right here in the back. It tells you how to interview people. You simply follow it. It's completely prescriptive. It has all the great concepts at the beginning, but it's completely prescriptive at the end, and that's what's beautiful about it. So we've adopted it, in our talent team. You can't get hired unless you pass this test, okay, of being the ideal team player. You can't actually even keep your job at ConnectWise unless you pass this test. And anytime someone falls outside of the boundaries of this concept, they're being mentored. And so it's just, here's kind of the north, this is your true north when it comes to people, and that's how we've adopted it at ConnectWise. And just having the book is such an amazing thing because you're communicating the concept so easily and so simply and so consistently throughout the organization. I think the problem that we have in our organizations is we get on we think we're going to do it, it's a one and done. We're moving so fast, it's one and done. It's like, this is forever, right? So once you give a colleague that's every colleague in your company one of these, that's forever, right? And you can always now, you have your vernacular to talk about, it's humble, hungry, smart. And so it just makes everything really simple. So I think you should charge like a whole lot more for this book.
What I like you said too, and it was just interesting, is onboarding. Because people tend to think it's like hiring and firing. Like, do we bring them in? But the funny thing is, most people are like open to something, but they got to know that it's real. And when you bring somebody on and you go, you know how we interviewed you? This is still what we want from you. And this is what we're going to talk to you about right away. It's crazy how that will actually shift people's behavior. It's not like people are born one way or the other. And I remember I worked for a technology company that had really bad values. It was known in the industry, you guys know who it is. And then I went to another company that was the opposite. And I interviewed with the founder of the opposite, the really people-oriented company, client-oriented company. And he said, hey, I know you came from that other firm. We're going to detox you. And it was like, he mentored me, and he said, I'm going to show you that. And I was like, I'm so glad, because I didn't really like working there. He goes, I know, but that got into your system probably because that's how to survive there. So we're going to help you unlearn that. And that was the first day of work. And that's the thing. Onboarding is critical.
Yeah.
So when you talk about humble, hungry, smart, and you're interviewing and hiring, but then the first day you come in and go, this is how to succeed here, it's amazing how it takes root.
Great. I think you had a question here. Yeah.
Quick question. We worked extensively on culture in our organization, mission, vision, values, and Mike O'Connor, who worked with Ken Blanchard, we've kind of implemented a lot of that. Mike and I are friends. And so what I loved about the book, and it's, again, so powerful in its simplicity, has everything to do with the candidate or the individual. What's the linkage to company culture? Help me understand the best connection.
I was just
there.
thinking about that as they were going over here, and it's an interesting thing. It's like, here's how I would describe it. And this is nuanced and it's important. Because so your company has company values, right?
Yep.
If one of those values, stated or unstated, because values can be, sometimes it's a marketing effort, and but if one of your values really is teamwork.
It's our second value.
Okay, that's where this fits. So if you're seriously committed to, like, that's one of the things we believe, this is where that fits in. It's like, and in order to do that, we got to do the humble, hungry, smart thing, because that's by definition what the kind of people are going to look like. If a company says, teamwork's really not that important to us. Our values are this, this, and this. And again, sometimes you have what we call permission to play values, which is like, we don't have it on the poster, we just assume it. That's okay. But if a company really isn't into the teamwork thing, I would say this is not their thing. But in this day and age, you almost have to be. I mean, with the nature of how we work across boundaries and the way things get done, teamwork has become so commonly desired. That's where this fits in. So when people say, well, what about our other 4 values? I would say, well, those are still really important. Because you might say, well, one of our, like you guys talked about today, I mean, many of the values you guys were talking about today, but agility is one. Is that humble, hungry, and smart? Well, it kind of goes with that, but it's a separate one too. By all means, continue to pursue that. And by all means, think about what are the behaviors that a person who is generally agile will have. So don't make this like this takes the place of your values. It's just another subset, especially as it pertains to teamwork. Does that make sense?
It makes all the sense.
Good. I don't want people to think, well, these are your company values now.
Yeah.
They just happen to be ours.
Yeah, the question was about the linkage, because I mean, again, it's the individual piece and where does it fit, because we've worked hard on trust, teamwork, financial success, and innovation in the values, and we manage by them. It's not a marketing thing. And that makes great sense.
Right. The other thing is these are the raw materials of a person who will slide into your culture well. If a person is humble, hungry, and smart, it's just going to be so much easier to help them to to understand the other values and to do what you need them to do.
Yeah.
All right?
Good question. So, your core values are going to be, say, your 6 things, right? One of them better, when you double click on it, better take you right to this book, is my answer, okay? Sean, you have a question.
Yeah. So, I work for a pretty big MSP that has many different pieces of the organization. This is easy to implement when the person at the top is pushing down, but sometimes you have an organization that is so culturally different that you have a whole other side of the house that might not look quite the way we look. How do you influence the organization that is not necessarily part of your structure to adopt this to drive cohesiveness across disparate organizations?
So when cohesiveness and teamwork is not necessarily being pushed from the top, or when there's different organizations within a company that have different views of this, and you work in one that really wants to make teamwork a reality, but it's not necessarily being driven from the top or in that other organization, I think there's 2 things I would think about. First of all, Stephen Covey, the circle of influence and circle of concern. You can get really bogged down worried about, well, how come the CEO doesn't quite get this? And why doesn't that other organization get it? Man, if only we could get those. And until we get those, what happens is you're living outside of your circle of influence, right? And what happens is, so you're focused on things out here where not what's going on in your organization, your circle of influence actually starts to shrink. But if you can say, okay, it's true that the CEO isn't completely on board yet, and it's true that our other organization doesn't quite get it yet, let's do the very best we can here. What happens is your circle of influence will actually grow because people go, what are you guys doing that's working so well? And now they're actually open to hearing that. So try not to get bogged down. We all do this in life, but I don't control that. It's like, but what do you control? Now, the other thing I would say is we oftentimes underestimate the power of taking a risk in sharing ideas with others in humility. In other words, and I talked in our session earlier about speaking the kind truth. It might very well be you're the right person to go to the CEO or to the head of that other division and say, listen, I'm not telling you this because I'm smarter than you. I'm not telling you this because I'm better than you or I could do your job. But here's some things I know about and that I'm exposed to that I think you would really benefit from. And I just wanted to share those with you just in case. It works more often. Most people talk themselves out of having that conversation, and more often than we think, it's effective.
So just in case this gets broadcast, I want to make it clear, I didn't say the CEO wasn't on board or the other division wasn't on board. Disclaimer.
Yeah, you did.
A friend's company. We had a question over here too.
I'm gonna real quick though. Get this book, let it infiltrate your group, okay, and then exactly what Patrick said, hand it off to whoever is not on board anywhere in the company and say, this book has made a big difference in our company. If in fact it does, and if you use the book, it will.
And there is something to that. I always hate to say that. It's like, what you should do is buy a book and get one.
But that's why I'm saying it for you, because
Yes,
I'm just saying
that.
it's the simplest way.
And all my books are fiction. I only wrote one, people don't know that. The reason why is because it's a story. So first of all, the CEO won't be bored reading it.
Right.
Because I've read a lot of books and I was like, oh. And secondly, you're reading about someone else, and so you're kind of just watching this other person and you're going, oh, wait, I can relate to that. As opposed to a book where I'm saying, here's what you should do. And so it's a short story, and by the end of it, people are like, I think it really helps people go, yeah, I need to do that too. Because you relate to the characters. So I do think it's not a bad way to do it, is to say, instead of me telling you, I like this book. And the author is so handsome, it's crazy.
I love it.
Firstly, thanks for the truly inspirational speech. It felt like almost a personal calling for me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad.
I'm embarrassed to say I've not read any of your books, but I certainly will be.
I'm happy for that, because that means there's plenty more for you to read.
Absolutely. I was going to ask a question around personal development. You mentioned the 3 characteristics, and then, the 3 characteristics, and then ranking those. And if you thought, well, I need a development in more than one area, would you recommend focusing on 3rd place, or maybe 2nd and 3rd, because you felt like you needed to up your game in different areas?
Well, I think that if you're 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, if there's any gap between really being great at any of them, I think it's good to work on that gap. And none of us are perfect, so we all have stuff we can work on. I think the idea of working on the 3rd would be, Dave Ramsey is a guy that helps people with debt, and he always says, take on the smallest debt first, so it gets you confidence. And I love that. But I think in this case, working on the third is probably where you're going to get the most improvement, and people are going to notice that most and see. Because if I said to somebody, yeah, I'm really lazy, but I'm not always humble and I'm not always smart, I think I'm going to try to get a little more humble. I think everybody would be like, hey, let's work on that lazy thing a little bit. and so I think in this case I would say focus on that third one. Okay. Because I think that it's pretty low-hanging fruit usually. Sure. Just focusing on that, like there's usually a few behaviors, and when you say to your team, I'm not going to do this anymore, this anymore, this anymore, they're going to be like, just by putting that out there, you've already become a better team player. So I would say work on them all, but I'd say really focus on that one that needs it the most. Okay, thank you. Sure. Thanks for the kind words.
I have a question.
Yes.
Teams. In teams, we have technology teams. ConnectWise partners are built from technology teams. The whole IT nation is nothing more than a group of technology teams, assembled into companies. So teams are a really important concept. The ideal team player is absolutely the right answer for an individual. Just talk a little bit about the dynamic of teams that are not filled with humble and hungry and smart people. And what are the pitfalls of that? In other words, what are some of the common characteristics of the teams that are dysfunctional? How can they identify their teams as being dysfunctional? Some telltale signs.
Yeah, well, I like to say this. First of all, if somebody said to me, you can only look at one thing in a company to decide whether to invest in them or whether you think they're going to be good, I would go to one of their executive staff meetings. So you'll know a bad team oftentimes by how they behave during meetings, because meetings are kind of what they do. But what you're going to notice is they say things to one another in the hallways that they don't say in meetings, that they don't admit when they're wrong, that they don't argue well, that they don't call out one another's negative behaviors. So we have an online assessment for the 5 dysfunctions of a team that people fill out. And it just asks them the behaviors, like how often do you call somebody on a behavior that's not productive? How often do you do you disagree with somebody passionately about something? How often do you hold people accountable? It's crazy how all the behaviors of a dysfunctional team are so obviously untenable, and how we tolerate them because we're not sure how to get at the core of what's wrong. But I think you're going to see it in meetings where there's very little passion. People are going to be bored. They're going to be saying things after the meeting that they didn't say during the meeting. There's going to be a lot of politics and confusion. And you go 2 or 3 levels below, and people are going to be fighting bloody, unwinnable battles with one another because the people at the top aren't having the right conversations. So it's a great question, actually. Think about what are the artifacts of a dysfunctional organization? And I would say boring meetings, unresolvable conflict deep down inside, lack of passion and conflict among the leaders.
Yeah. How about lack of radical transparency as well?
Well, yeah, and that's like
because
yes.
Yeah, I mean,
you go to that.
To
they
me,
don't admit things.
Yeah, in our meetings, we'll have disagreement, and that's actually a hallmark of ConnectWise. We're okay with having disagreements. We're going to, disagree on things and commit anyway. And so I guess my next question would be, teams that are dysfunctional have an immense cost on the business.
Oh.
And the ability for you to perceive that and then have the courage to do something about it. To me, I've always found that to be when I get the major uplift is when I say, all right, I don't want to do this. I see what's wrong there. We've worked with this person. We're going to have to manage them out of the company. And then when you finally manage that person out of the company, it's almost as if the fog lifts on that entire team.
Yeah. It's liberating.
Yeah, it is liberating.
And so what keeps us, one of the questions of human nature, what keeps us in situations that are difficult? And I think it's a lack of courage and vulnerability, saying, just going, and it's counterintuitive. I mean, building a great team is not a natural thing. We come out of the womb thinking about ourselves. And so to get somebody to be vulnerable, radical transparency, as you called it, is not natural. Nobody says, here's a secret to success in life. Walk around and tell people your deepest, darkest secrets and your fears. Now, I'm not saying you should walk around and tell strangers that, but the only way to develop relationships with people is to be like, hey, let me tell you who I am and what I'm thinking and what I'm concerned about and that frees people up, but it's something that we tell our kids and we tell people in society not to do it, and then you get them on a team and they act that way and it totally breaks down trust. So it's a really countercultural thing, and you said it yourself, radical transparency. If that's where I always start with teams. I say, if you do one thing, get people to be vulnerable. Because if people aren't vulnerable, they can't engage in conflict, they can't hold each other accountable, they can't focus on results. But if you can get them to be vulnerable, that's a huge first step.
Yeah.
Trust is at the heart of this all.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. It made me think of something, though, as I'm sitting there watching this classic Irish Italian guy here. I'm thinking, you know what? You know where you learn that? Confession.
Oh, it's the most interesting thing, because I do a lot of work in churches now. A lot of my work in churches, and one of the things, and my wife wasn't Catholic growing up. I mean, she'd always say, "You Catholics," and then she became Catholic. And one of the things that I learned is that confession is the most beautiful thing. People talk about, oh, it's guilt. It's like, no, it's liberation. And when my wife became Catholic, she went to confession for the first time. She was kind of dreading it. She came out and said, she had tears in her eyes. She goes, that was incredible. Because I just went and said everything. And I unburdened myself. And on teams, it's all uncomfortable. And somebody finally just says, I'm sorry, I've been a jerk to you for the last year. And you know why? Because I'm kind of frustrated by this. And I'm kind of worried that this is going to happen. And sometimes I'm insecure about this. It is like you've lifted this veil off of things.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. That's how I learned it.
That is how you learned
it.
it.
And it really, and all the teams that when I work with them, they're like, oh yeah, this is great. This is a much better way to be than holding things back and trying to control things. Just be naked.
Yeah.
Figuratively.
Yeah, I get it. Because if not, you're going to have to go to confession.
There you go.
That was your best book.
Which one? Getting Naked?
Getting Naked.
Getting Naked.
I loved writing that book. And I know that you've talked about that too. For service providers, it's the other thing. You're working with a client and you know that something might have gone wrong, and your first inclination is to cover it up and go, man, I screwed that up, didn't I? We live this with our clients, and we can't break up with them. Because it's so refreshing for them to work with a client that will ask a difficult question or admit when they're wrong or do something hard, but it's counterintuitive. Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that. I love that book, Getting Naked, too, and it does fall. Humble, hungry, and smart people who learn to be vulnerable, they're the naked service
I
providers.
had my whole team read it.
Really?
Great, yeah.
Oh, that's
I
great.
bought it for
There's
all
your
of
second
them.
book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Getting
There you
Naked.
go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
We take maybe one or two more questions.
This might be a short one. The Fable-based style, where did that come from? Did you read something else like that? Or where was the inspiration? The style's awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. So all my books except for one is a Fable. And here's what happened. I took a screenwriting class in college. I was an economics and Spanish major. I took a screenwriting class in college, and I loved it. And I always wanted to be a writer. I watched the Waltons when I was a kid. You remember that show? And John Boyle was the writer, and I was like, I want to be like him. But my dad, God rest his soul, and he was a practical guy, and he never went to college. He said, you're going to have to study something that's going to get you a job. So I studied economics, and I was a management consultant, but I kept writing. And then one year, I came up with this theory on leadership. I was just working with all these different CEOs, and I was working at a technology company, and I said, oh, look at that CEO. He struggles with this. Oh, she struggles with this. Oh, he struggles with this. And I came up with this theory, and I just told people about it. And I wasn't planning to be an author or anything like that, but somebody a year later repeated back my theory, and I said, where did you hear that? They said, from you. And then this company I was working with said, on the side, said, you should write a book. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book, but gosh, so many business books I never finish. I read the first couple chapters, and I think I got it. And people would find the book in my office and say, have you read that book? And I'd be, yeah, I've read the executive summary of that book. So I said, I don't want to write a book that people won't finish. So I said, I'm going to write a book that's interesting enough to finish on its own merit, but then people will learn from. Because I'd always realized that you learn more through stories. And so I used the screenwriting skills to hook people at the beginning, to short chapters that people kind of feel a sense of closure and then they want to keep going. And I didn't know. We were going to take that book to Kinko's and have it photocopied because we didn't think anybody was going to publish it. And so a publisher published it, kind of said, yeah, we think this is interesting. And then more and more people said they liked that format. and it's fun to write for me. I like it. It's really hard, but I do enjoy it. And so that's how it came about, because I was an aspiring writer who then got interested in organizational stuff and decided to use that skill set. And I wrote one nonfiction book, and a lot of very serious CEOs who thought the fiction was a little light were like, I like this one the best. And the other people said, write fiction again. And so so that's kind of what I do now. So that's kind of how it came about, an accident, and I'm very glad I did it. So.
Anyone else?
Yes.
You, so I share your Myers-Briggs
sorry.
profile. Yeah, it's a conflict avoider, self-proclaimed. But I was thinking about, we've done a lot of work looking at that, and the validity of where somebody lands in Myers-Briggs is really interesting, but how people actually test and get that. Like, I've taken it 4 times and it's been wrong, but I know what I am.
So
it's
much.
crystal clear. How do you reconcile that?
So you know
struggle
something?
with that.
So I was with my sons and their fraternity brothers that live in the house. There's 11 guys that live in a house in college. And I went down, I took them all to dinner. And we started talking about the Myers-Briggs because my sons interned with my company this summer. And at that dinner, I typed them all. And I wouldn't let them take a test. Because the test, when you're, the indicator, as you're filling it out, you've really got to think about how you are, not as a dad, not at work, not in this, and it's really hard to do that. And so when you take the test and you get it back, they say that the results are 75% accurate. That means 1 out of 4 is often wrong, which changes everything. So I much prefer to ask people questions and then expose them to them, and they find themselves. So I don't like taking the instrument. I really would prefer explaining it quickly to people. Also, I don't think you need 2 days to do it. I think you can do it in 20 minutes or an hour. And then showing them, and they will find themselves. Because you don't want to type people incorrectly and then have a self-fulfilling prophecy where you go, well, you're one of these. I'm a real big believer and understand that Myers-Briggs and tools like that are great for helping you understand a person's general tendencies, but you can't know everything about a person. So I say BMB is as important as Myers-Briggs. BNB is beyond Myers-Briggs. So people go, well, I'm an ENTJ. And I go, yeah, but you were raised by a dad who taught you this, and you grew up in this place, and you did this, and your faith, and your wife, and all these things play into that. But it's a great place to start. So putting too much stock in it is a problem. Having people fill out a test and getting typed wrong is a real problem. And ignoring all the other factors is too. But it's a good place to start.
Thank you.
Sure.
Last question.
Yes.
Okay, so you are here at IT Nation for the first time. The crowd loved you, a group of technology solution providers. You really hit a home run with them. Tell me, what your impression has been of IT Nation and the people that are here.
Well, it's
and
just
the event.
It's just like not judging a book by its cover.
Right.
Like sometimes I go to technology events and it's hard to. This audience, if they loved me, I love them right back. They are so interested and passionate and willing to enter into the danger, and so this is one of those events where I would send people. I wish every industry had events like this, because the people there interact with each other. They're passionate about what they do. They have tons of questions, and if you just said, "Hey, Pat," my wife said to me last night, "You're going to speak at an IT conference." This is not how she would describe it. Similarly, I've been to other ones where it's like, it's an advertising conference. You think it's going to be fun, and it might not be. So the culture of an organization or an association or a conference, it's all about the people and how they make it. And so you can't judge a book by its cover, and this was a blast. I mean, it really was. I came off stage like, that wasn't work. That was fun. And that's when life is wonderful. It's a blessing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for all the questions.
Give them a round. Now, he won't say it, but I'm going to say it for him. This has transformed our company, 910 colleagues, okay? You can't influence 910 people very easily, but you can buy them this book or let them get it on Audible, okay? And we have been able to, Jen, how quickly have we been able to influence all of ConnectWise with this book?
They do have that vernacular. It's like, oh yeah, that part of the book. What did you think of Ted? Did you know about that thing? Did you see it coming? And it's like, it's crazy when you get people doing that.
Right, right. But I'm just saying, it's like that has been, 910 colleagues, okay, worldwide have been influenced by this book, and now they all know what's expected of them. And so it automatically, the book, by giving the book to everyone, it automatically creates the hard part, which is where you have trouble, accountability. Your book,
Right.
even though you don't want to hold people
Right.
accountable, here's the blessing that you're giving the world. Just your book alone creates accountability if everybody reads it and everybody holds each other accountable. And just by reading it, you're going to start saying, hey, you're doing that.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
And it becomes part of the culture.
It becomes part of the
Yeah.
culture. So thank you so much, Patrick.
All right. Thank you.
Great job.